going to go through committee announcements first, and that will include an awesome recap of our I Vote Because campaign. And then, as I said, our main topic is voter ID laws and access. So we have Denise Lieberman from the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition and Selene Gomez from VoteRiders with us today. Thank you both for giving us part of your Saturday morning. So now I'm going to hand it off to Judy Ann, who's going to fill us in on the I Vote Because campaign success.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Great to be here this morning with everybody and see everybody. And looking forward to our fantastic speakers and learning all about the voter ID access and laws. We are the social media team ran what we are thinking is a very successful social media campaign, Get Out the Vote. Our goal was to reach a number of voters and just kind of fill and flood social media with the I Vote Because framework and everybody's, many, many reasons, all the reasons there are to vote. And also to connect in with other leagues, other organizations. And we're very happy with it. A big shout out to the whole team. Special shout out to Ashley and to Katie, who helped craft this frame, the great frame that we were able to share with 9 other leagues. And we created those, established those relationships with their social media folks, and have gotten great responses from them in email, and that we want to continue those associations as well. We also partnered with the Kansas City Current Soccer League. It was a little crazy, fantastic time for them because they made it in their second year to the finals, the national women's soccer finals. So we did have 2 team players, Desiree and Lynn, participate, as you can see on there. And then I did put how other leagues used our frame and interpreted those posts on their social, and we're all sharing each other's social. We also saw a little growth with non-official partners, quote unquote, other people who adopted the campaign that we weren't connected with initially, but it was exciting to see how that grew, and we're excited to move forward in the future with this campaign and other campaigns, and grow those relationships. So thank you to everyone in the league, everyone who shared, and please continue to share. All the posts are still up there on all of our accounts, social media accounts. So whatever you're plugged into, go there, take a look, share why you vote. If you've done it already, share it again. And if there are any questions, would love to answer them. But that's kind of an overview of our campaign. Thank you for the support and the support in running it. And that is my overview. Thank you.
Awesome. Congratulations to the social media team. You guys just did such an awesome job with this, and it really picked up momentum as we got closer to the campaign. I think you guys made a real impact. So awesome. Up next, we have Mary Lindsay from the Legislative Action Committee with a call to action.
Yes. Our vote is our voice. We've heard that a million times, but we still have a voice now after we all hopefully voted last week. That's what the Legislative Action Committee is about. We've developed a new streamlined way to make calls to action. In the last session, we had a few trackers, each following a lot of bills. This time, we'd like to have a lot of trackers so that each can follow fewer bills. So more trackers are essential. The General Assembly will be off and running in early January, and we need to be also. So we have scheduled training for trackers. That's going to be on Saturday, December 10th at 10 o'clock in the Waldo Library. Please, please come, but please also register for the training on the lwvkc.org website. You do need to be signed in to the website in order to sign, to register. But if you don't know how to do that, I imagine Laura Mountjoy can help you with that. I think she's the person who helped me some time ago. Anyway, be great if we could have lots of people participate this year.
That's wonderful. That's a great way to get involved, folks. And I will drop the link in the chat directly to register to join that training session once I switch over to Speaker Deck. So stay tuned for that. We'll make sure everybody has easy access. Awesome. Looking forward to your work next year. And thank you for all your committee did this year as well. All right. Up next, Rita, our treasurer, is going to talk about the nominating committee.
So thank you, Heather. This year I have the honor of heading the nominating committee, and we are always looking for people to join our committee. It's not, you cannot join through the regular channels. You have to email me and I will put you on the committee. At the moment, we have myself and 2 other people on the committee, and we'd love to have a total of 5. So if you're interested in how the nominating committee works and how people become board members, how our leadership works, join the nominating committee. That's all I can say. Our work will be done by Zoom meetings. Our work is also short-lived. It goes from maybe the beginning of December until March. That's it, when we supply our final report to the board. And that's the only time that we are actually active. If you also, so if you want to join the nominating committee, please let me know. That's just treasurer@lwvkc.org. Also, if you would like to be considered for board membership, please let me know. Board training is available. I have documents that I can forward to you about requirements for being on the board and roles and responsibilities for being on the board. And I'd be more than happy to talk to you about that as well, or any of our other members who are on the nominating committee. So just let me know, just drop me a quick email. I'll get back to you, I promise. And hopefully we'll have a wonderful slate to be nominated in May. Thanks.
Awesome. Looking forward to meeting our next board members. Thank you, Rita. Really appreciate that. I'm up next. So I'm Heather Fiziak. I am chair of the membership meetings committee behind the programming that you're seeing today. And we are also putting together our annual Winter League event. This is the first one in person since before the pandemic. So we're really, really excited. It's a members only event. We'll be doing it as a dinner on Wednesday, December 7th. So mark your calendars. Dinner is from 6 to 8 p.m. And we are hosting this at a local BIPOC-owned business. It's called the Equal Minded Cafe. It's at 43rd and Troost Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. They have a wonderful coffee bar on site, which is going to be available to us at the event, I believe. We're working to confirm that now. Like I said, we'll be hosting dinner. And we will have vegetarian and gluten-free options available. So if you have any dietary restrictions when you register for the event, just make sure to specify that where we've put a question for you. So at this event, you can expect to see awards. We have a silent auction to help raise funds to cover the cost of the event and support the league in the coming year. We're going to have a selfie station. It's going to be awesome. There's no cost to you, but space is limited. So we do need you to RSVP. It is, like I said, a members only event. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat here momentarily to the page on lwvkc.org. You'll need to log in order to register. So make sure to RSVP right away since we have limited space. And if you find that you can't attend after all, no worries, but do let us know so we can free that space up for someone else to join us. If anybody knows anybody or any businesses that would like to contribute anything else to our silent auction, do reach out to me and I'd love to talk to you. Any questions, shoot me an email. Look forward to seeing you all there. Okay, very excited to get into our featured speaker content for today. I know we've all been looking forward to it for quite a while. And our very first speaker is the amazing Selene Gomez. Just wait until you hear how accomplished she is. She's the National Outreach Director and Texas Voter ID Coalition Coordinator with VoteRiders. And she serves, prior to that, she worked with Mi Familia Vota Education Fund to increase Latinx voter turnout through voter registration education, citizenship programs, and get out the vote campaigns. Very relatable, right? So she previously worked in the U.S. House of Representatives in one of the most competitive districts in the nation. She has also served within many nonprofits, including the League of Women Voters, but also youth transitioning into adulthood as a board member, San Antonio Immigrant Youth Movement as Director of External Affairs, Texas Dream Alliance as a coordinator, Council for Minority Student Affairs as founder and president, United We Dream as a field organizer, and last but certainly not least, Defense Project as a fellow. She obtained her bachelor's degree of science from Texas A&M College Station and her master's in public administration from the University of Texas in San Antonio. Everyone, please welcome Selene. Do me a favor and mute your mics if you are not Selene. And it can also help with streaming speeds if you disable your video while the speakers are talking. So if you're able to do that, I would appreciate that as well. Selene, it's all yours. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Heather, and I'll go ahead and share my screen here. So as Heather mentioned, I am Selene Gomez. I'm the National Outreach Director for VoteRiders. And today I'll be talking to you about voter ID. However, I am aware that you all are very familiar with that. So I do want to highlight some of the findings from this election, which they are a little limited so far, but we're still trying to get more information. And also just talk to you about some tools and services that you all can use on the ground. I heard that, you know, your focus of a lot of you is getting the youth vote out, and there's different focuses. So looking forward to potentially incorporating some of these resources to the work that you all are already doing. But before I talk a little bit more about that, I do want to give you a little bit of context about the organization itself. So VoteRiders has been on the ground 10 years. We celebrated our 10th birthday this past April. So we started in 2012 where we really saw a wave of voter IDs being implemented in different states. And so that is kind of the inception of VoteRiders and why we started to do a lot of mass education and actually direct voter ID assistance to voters in states that had voter ID laws. One of the things is that we are a national organization and we are nonpartisan, and we are very strict when it comes to the nonpartisanship. That is one of the things that we emphasize. And for us, we just inform voters about voter ID laws to make sure that they have the ID that they need, to make sure that they're not turned away at the polls, especially when we're talking about first-time voters or voters that have been disenfranchised for years and they're going to vote after years. We know that sometimes it can be an intimidating process. And so for us, we want to make sure that they're confident that they have what they need to go and cast a regular ballot, and that they have a positive experience. The next slide here shows a color-coded map just to give you an idea of voter ID laws. We estimate that there's about 25 million voting age American citizens that do not have a current government issued ID. And the color coding here is the lightest color are states that do not have a voter ID law. However, even though they don't have a voter ID law, we do get quite a bit of questions that they were, you know, why was I asked for an identification? If it's your first time voting in a federal election, you're still going to be asked to provide identification or proof of identity, but that's due to a national law, not a state voter ID law. The states that are in the middle teal, that are a little bit darker, those are states that have a voter ID law, but also provide alternatives. So for example, in Texas, you would need a photo ID, and if you don't, you can actually sign an affidavit and provide a secondary piece of document and still cast a regular ballot. And the states that are the darkest teal are the ones that we considered strict voter ID laws, to where there really is no alternative, unfortunately. And you have to have a photo ID to be able to fully cast a regular ballot. Just to give you a little bit more background as well, since 2020, we saw that there were record-breaking numbers on the voter turnout. And since the 2020 elections, there were 12 states that enacted either new or stricter voter ID laws. So these went to effect in 2022. There is an asterisk on Montana because it was actually held after all, and it wasn't implemented. But as you can see, Missouri is a part of it. And so we knew that this was going to be, something that we needed to address because whatever the voter did in 2020 may not necessarily work for 2022. And so we are following these states closely, especially on the aftermath of what's going on. We saw from early on, for example, in Texas, after the primaries, there were over 25,000 mail-in ballots rejected because of the new ID requirement on those mail-in ballots. So we're really trying to track on the rest of the states as well. What were the implications that came with it? Especially with Georgia, we are currently also working on the special election. So seeing if there was also a specific impact, not just on the generals, but also on the runoff elections there. And we do update our website live. So if you have any questions on anything that's changed, you can always go to voteriders.org/ID check if you want to see any up-to-date information on any of the states or your state specifically. And of course, just to kind of give you a rough breakdown, out of those 12 states, 6 of them added new ID requirements for voting by mail. Missouri is one of the 3 states that restricted the types of acceptable identification. And then we have a couple of other, states here like Arkansas eliminating the affidavit. So the alternative that I was talking about, that people can sign to be able to still cast a regular ballot. And then, just adding extra ID requirements as well. Now, even though this is what we've been seeing, we saw that there were even a lot more states during their legislative sessions that introduced a lot of bills that included additional voter ID requirements. So I know you all are having a training and you're going to be tracking bills. So, this would definitely be a good thing to track as well, because even though it was changed on this last cycle, it could very well change again. And we know that this is very important because it's on us to be able to do the education to make sure that people are aware of these changes that are happening. Now, also, who is usually affected by voter ID laws? I think it's no surprise that the populations that tend to be affected by a lot of these voting laws, when it comes to voter registration, voting accessibility, are also the populations that are most affected by voter ID. We do have the youth that are especially affected just because they tend to be a little bit more mobile, especially college students, making the decision, do I want to stay registered where I live or where I now go to school? And what does that process look like, mail-in ballots or voting in person? In addition to that, one of the things that I always like to touch on, especially with organizations that do voter registration, is that a lot of the times people that are registering, especially youth, may not use their full name. And if they don't put their full name in their voter registration, and it doesn't match their official document, let's say their state driver's license or ID, then sometimes they can have issues at the polls. So that is one of the things that we have unfortunately seen, especially with students of color, not necessarily including all of their name as in their official documents. We also have voters with disabilities that are impacted by this, and the accessibility to the polls, accessibility to go to get their identification. And so we help them as well. Of course, people of color, there's been quite a bit of studies showing that people of color are more likely to not have a government issued ID than their white counterparts. Also, non-binary and transgender individuals, they do have extra scrutiny when it comes to showing their identification. Sometimes at the polls, if the gender marker doesn't reflect what they identify as. Older voters as well, especially individuals, if they decide, hey, I'm not going to drive anymore, I don't need to renew my driver's license, but then they realize that that's actually what they've been using to vote. And once it's expired, then sometimes that can also become a barrier. And of course, there's, a lot of other populations like Native American voters that are especially impacted by this, because especially if they live in reservations, they're hours away one way, to be able to either go vote in person or a post office so they can do their mail-in ballot. Now, I'm going to go through this very quickly because I know that you all are very familiar with this. But as you all know, the acceptable identifications, as long as the documents satisfy the requirements, right, containing your name, and also, a document that shows a picture, if it has an expiration that shows it and that it's not expired, or expired after the most recent general election, or the document was issued by the U.S. or the state of Missouri. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to put them on the chat. But of course, we also have our page for Missouri, which is voteriders.org/Missouri. And it also has a lot of frequently asked questions when it comes to voter ID when voting in person and also voting by mail. And also, being able to use military IDs. So any identification that has your picture that isn't expired or doesn't have an expiration date. And of course, being part of one of the armed forces branches in there is acceptable as well. Now with voting by mail, you do have to provide the last four of your social security number on your application form, and some people may have to provide a copy of their ID, but you can essentially do the no excuse voting 2 weeks before the election. And as I mentioned before, one of the notes is that if it's your first time voting in a federal election, you will probably be asked to provide a proof of identity if just because it's part of the Helping Americans Vote Act, which is the federal legislation. Now, the thing that I do want to highlight with you all is what we have found so far, which again, it's very limited because we just had the elections, but Missouri's first election with voter ID, we have seen so far some preliminary numbers that fewer ballots were casted from 2018. However, we know that this was a national trend. We know that even though it was quite a high turnout historically in the last 30 years, it still did fall a little bit short from 2018. There is still very little information of how many voters had to cast a provisional ballot due to the lack of acceptable ID in the state. We were in contact with the state Secretary of State, but as of the 15th, there was still no additional information, but we will keep staying in touch. And as we get more information, we'll make sure to make that available. But one of the numbers that some of the numbers we were able to get was, for example, with the Kansas City Election Board, they reported so far 430 provisional ballots cast by people with ID. And then with the St. Louis County Board of Elections, they told our staff that there was between 350 and 360 provisional ballots that were cast. And they thought that they would more than likely be counted, but of course, we're going to follow up to make sure that that was the actual result. And then Jasper County Clerk did report 99 provisional ballots, but nothing on the counting process. And of course, there is more data and stories to come on whose ballots were counted and whose weren't. If this is something that interests you, we would love to also work with you all on this. If you want to also follow this, whether it's to get stories for you, for example, if you are active during legislative session, to be able to showcase these cases, and for us to be able to really bring some media attention and just some voter education on that. We would love to talk to you all to see if that's something that would interest you. But again, you can go to voteriders.org/Missouri to stay up to date on all this information. Now I will talk to you on how we can help voters. I know that there were some talks about, doing voter registrations, talking to certain organizations and so forth. Just so you know, with VoteRiders, not only do we do mass education, but we also do voter ID assistance. So we help people get their state ID, and we cover the cost, any fees associated with it. If they need ride to the local ID issuing office, we take them to there and back. If they need a copy of their birth certificate or their social security card, we help with all of that. So if you ever encounter someone who is needing assistance with that, please make sure that you refer them to us. And I'll make sure to mention our helpline number, which I'll talk a little bit about here. Also, it is always good to bookmark our state website. As I said, it gives you the details on the IDs that you need to take in person or by mail, the acceptable IDs, any alternatives. There's a screenshot of an example one, the Texas one, the link to the Secretary of State. You also have a button where you can request help from us if you see that there is already a need that you don't have an acceptable ID. We do update this in real time. So for us, our goal is the person that is going to go to our website, if they're going to go vote that day, they know exactly what it is they need. So if there's any ID changes, we don't reflect those ID changes when the legislation is passed, but when it's implemented. But it is up to date. There has been some instances when our website is actually more up to date than the Secretary of State's website. So we work with those offices very closely to make sure that they're giving the correct information in a timely manner as well. So this is a good website to just kind of keep on there. We also have our voter ID information cards, which you can download as digital pictures. A lot of our partners use these and they text in their text banks, for example, or on their newsletters or email blasts that they have. You can also order these completely free of charge, the physical cards. They are business size. So the neat thing about that is that it fits in your wallet. As you can see in this picture, in the front, they're all kind of the same. It has our helpline number, which people can call or text. And in the back, it actually tells you the list of acceptable IDs and any alternatives if there's any in your state. We do have these all fully bilingual in English and in Spanish. And if you would like to order some so you can have when you're tabling and doing voter registration, because you have a voter ID loss. So unfortunately, it's not enough to register. You also have to make sure that you have the proper documentation. You can actually order these completely free of charge and there's no limit. We've had organizations that have ordered 250 cards. We've had organizations that have ordered 100,000 cards at a time, and we're happy to provide those. And we do audit those every year as well to make sure. Well, of course, we'll modify it if there's any actual change throughout the year, but at the minimum, we audit them at least every year if there hasn't been a change, just to make sure that it's the most up-to-date and accurate information. We also have our helpline number, which is 844-338-8743. Feel free to add it to any of your literature when you're talking about voter ID, if they have any questions or if they have any, or they need help in actually obtaining their identification. You can also use our chat bot, which we have it through Facebook Messenger. And also if you go to our website, it will pop up on the bottom right corner. It is in English and in Spanish. The thing that I like about this is that you don't have to go through 10 prompts to get your question answered. The first two are, it does ask what language you prefer, and then it asks what state you're in, so we know what information to give you. But after that, it doesn't matter if there's any misspelling or what it is that you put, because you're going to be chatting with a staff member or a volunteer on the back end. We also do joint outreach, so we do co-branded materials for special projects. We do virtual volunteer events. Right now, we're having quite a bit of volunteer events for Georgia specifically, but if you all want to have an event for your state, we are more than happy to do that and bring our volunteers along with your volunteers. We do quite a bit of letter writing parties, which have been very popular with a lot of not just the organizations, but the volunteers really like it and engage with it. And if there's any special project that you'd be interested in working with us. We also have the direct voter contact partnership. So if you're having pledge cards, or you're just having a script out there to do some GOTV or do voter registration, we can do a referral process to where you can ask people about ID. And if they don't have one, you can send us their information and we do the follow-up, and we do a short intake to see what it is that they need to be able to get their identification. And then we help them with that. So if that's something that you want to streamline as a partnership with us, please feel free to contact me. We also do voter ID training. So we do state specific laws. You know, I was told that you all are very informed with it already, but with the ID changes, as we gather more information, if you're interested in more of an update, we're more than happy to do that as well. And we can do it virtually or in person in places that we do have staff, so we can coordinate something with you all. So please keep in touch if you are interested in becoming a partner, or if you want to use any of these tools and services, you can email me. There is my email address. You know, we know that voter confusion is very real. And a lot of the times, unfortunately, it's not out of malice, but sometimes it's not having the proper training, where some people may be turned away when they shouldn't be turned away, or ask for additional information that isn't necessarily required. And so for us, we really want to be that safety net for voters. But it's even better to be able to catch them before they go to the polls, so they can also advocate for themselves, because they have the confidence that they have what they need to cast a regular ballot. So if you have any questions on anything that I talked about, any of the tools or the services that you all want to take advantage of, it's never too early to start gearing up for 2024. And I'm sure there's going to be some local elections in 2023. So I look forward to staying in touch with you all. And please contact me if you would like to further any partnership, or if you just have any questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful information, and for all of the hard work that VoteRiders and you and your colleagues are doing. We do have a couple questions. So anybody who has a question, we're going to either A, use the chat feature if you would like me to pose the question, or B, you can use the raise hand feature and I'll bring you on to ask your question directly. Laura, if you don't mind, I'll bring you on to ask your own question directly about the organization name.
Okay. Selene, I am so impressed with the breadth of work you all have done, and the fact that your organization has been building over the last, I believe you said 10 years in your work. But I must confess that your name, when I first saw the card, I thought it was offering transportation for people who didn't have it to the polls. So I'm curious as to why you call yourself VoteRiders, because we've also we carry your cards when we do voter registration and get out the vote activities, such as we did at City Market that Corrine set up. And people would go, oh, this is about rides, because of the VoteRiders name. So I'm curious if you've gotten comments about that, and why you all chose VoteRiders versus Vote ID, or something that would more be more suited to what your actual mission is. Because I was a person who, when I first saw yours, I thought, oh, great, this is about, you know, transportation to the polls for those people who don't have an easy way to get to their polling place.
Yes, we do get that quite a bit. And that's why we make sure we also have partners that do provide rides. So even if people call to our helpline and they ask about rides, we connect them with somebody who could provide them with that. But VoteRiders came from the Freedom Riders movement. And so, you know, the founder, for her, you know, she kind of wanted to go off of that because at the time there weren't any organizations really doing anything for voter ID. So in honor of the Freedom Riders movement, you know, that's kind of how the name came about. But of course, right, even though it's VoteRiders, we kind of try to play with it, and even potentially saying, well, it's also voter IDers, right? And maybe being able to do the different color with the ID to kind of break it off from there. So we do get that quite a bit. And because of that, we have made sure that we've developed partnerships and really resources for people that need rights, because it's a very real thing. But fortunately, as people know about our organization, thankfully, we have now become, as you know, automatically you think of ID with us. But yeah, that is where our name came from, and we do get it quite a bit. And we like to explain the history of it, and hopefully we'll get to a point where people know that it's about ID, it's not about rights, but that we're still willing to help with that if that's something that's needed.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that history, because I really looked at that and couldn't understand why that was the name. So I like that. So in other words, if we hand out your business cards and people think it's about rides, we can say, no, it's to help you if you need ID. But if you call them, they also have information on transportation.
If we do have local partners, we will provide that information. We don't really get a lot of, calls when it comes to that, though, until around Election Day. And to be quite honest, when it's close to Election Day and early voting, we get calls from, rights to voter registration to police. We honestly get a wide range of questions. But if that is something that they would like to know about, and if we do have a partner or if we do have information on rights for their area, then we can provide that to them.
Okay, and one of our members has already shared VoteRiders to their social media, which I think is a great idea, and we could hashtag need an ID or help with ID, and maybe that will help get the word out too. So thank you so much, and you all look like you've done amazing work.
Thank you. And actually, if you go to, and I'll drop the link here to voteriders.org/media or social, there's actually already pre-made infographics with the hashtag ID check that we use, that you all can also use in your social media, to where you don't have to develop anything. We already have it for you. And it's kind of evergreen. It's just talking about the voter ID and needing to make sure that you're up to date. So I'll drop the link shortly.
Oh, that'd be terrific. And Judy Ann can show us all how to use it.
That sounds great. We have another question here, Selena, and I'm going to kind of piggyback on it. How long does it take on average to get people the ID they need from beginning to end of the process? But also, what are some of the specific obstacles that people have to getting ID to begin with that they come to you to help them overcome?
So I always get this question, and honestly, there isn't an answer because it just really depends on the person. Sometimes we get people that they have really not been able to coordinate public transportation to the appointments for years, honestly. We had a voter who I believe for 2 to 3 years couldn't coordinate getting an appointment with public transportation. And we were able to provide that transportation literally the next day when he had the appointment and he was able to get his ID. But then there's also more complicated processes. So there are times where people say that, they need their birth certificate, they need all their documents. So it's going to take time because we need to request them, they need to get an appointment, and then we need to set up a ride for them. Sometimes there's people that actually need legal assistance. So we also have a network of attorneys that are willing to take cases pro bono, to where there has to be amendments made and so forth. And that can also take months. And so there's a wide range. There really isn't quite an answer for it. And so that's why we do this work year round. And that's why we always encourage voters and encourage our partners to start talking about voter ID way earlier than, GOTV or, after the voter registration deadline. So we always encourage people when they're doing voter registration to already start talking about voter ID, to get them started thinking, do I have an ID? Do I need to get one? What do I have to do? The sooner the better for us, honestly. So, for us, this past year, since January 1st, we were already promoting that because we had primaries as early as March. And that could, it just really depends, one, on how much help you need, and two, on your accessibility to a phone number, because we do get quite a bit of people that are, for example, homeless, and may not have a phone. So making sure that we're also in touch with them. So that would also factor in as to how long it usually takes as well.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And how do you help people who need assistance that may have physical disabilities or impairments like hearing, sight, or verbal impairments?
So I'd like to highlight an example from Arizona. We actually had a couple, they were both blind, who for about a year were trying to get their identification. So our coordinator actually made sure that they had all of the documentation they needed. She actually went with them to the DMV, walked them through, and it was very eye-opening because the accessibility of the local DMV or the ID issuing office wasn't as friendly as it could have been. One of the examples that she used was, they said, don't move until you see the flash, and then you can move because a picture has been taken. They were both blind. They were good sports about it. They laughed it off, but little things like that, that, for us may be a little bit easier, and it wasn't for them. They were very grateful. They were actually able to vote in Arizona. They had moved to Arizona about a year ago, and they were trying to get their ID. They were finally able to get it, and they were able to vote these past elections. So that's just one example. But we do have people, volunteers or staff members. We try to be preemptive and make sure that there's that accessibility. And if there's anything else that they need, one of the things that we do have also on our website is we have a screen reader. So somebody can go to our website and they can still learn about, the voter ID law, even if, for example, they're blind. One of the things that is also one of the things that we're working on, seeing how we can make it more accessible. But we don't want to be to bite more than we can chew. We are still a growing organization. And if we do provide additional services, we want to make sure that we provide them well. So it's definitely something that we're also still striving for.
Wonderful. Okay, last question, Selena. It's personal. I want to know more about what drove you to get involved in the organizations you did, but what brought you to VoteRiders, and what's in it for you? Why did you choose this?
So I think that for me, I started with the immigration movement and just really advocating for my community. And then, I did work for a congressman, and I was able to kind of see the other side, right? Doing advocacy, doing organizing, and then seeing what's the flip side of that. And at the time, it was a very competitive race, probably one of the most competitive in the nation, in Texas for sure, which had 800 miles of the southern border. And I saw that, I know somebody made a comment earlier that there was some elections that were won by 500 votes. That was an election like that. It was about 1,000 votes. And if you broke it down, it was about, 14 votes every county that was part of the district. And at that time, in Texas, we already had the voter ID law. So I knew that whatever I did next, I wanted to make sure that it was about helping streamline voting accessibility, especially to voters of color and vulnerable populations. So with VoteRiders, when they had the position, I knew about voter ID, but I was guilty myself that I didn't necessarily think of it as much as I should have. And so for me, I kind of decided to dedicate myself on that because I knew that I wasn't the only one doing that. So that's kind of driven everything that I've done. I am actually now, because of all this work, in a PhD program for applied demography, to where I want to really look at voting patterns and see how it is that it can become more accessible. So honestly, this drive has driven me to get not only to be part of VoteRiders, but just to make a huge change, a career change, and being able to kind of help this field and organizations like yours, like ours, all the organizations that are really trying to increase voter turnout, especially with youth and with certain populations that unfortunately are disproportionately impacted by some of the voting laws that are being passed.
Wow. Brava, brava. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for your incredible work in the field and all you're doing to continue to advance yourself so you can advance others. I think that's amazing, and it's super inspirational for all of us. So it sounds like you're going to hang out in the chat and maybe share some links. And if anybody has any additional questions, I'm sure Selena is happy to answer those in the chat. But thank you so much. We're going to cut over to our friend Denise now, as soon as I figure out how to do that. Give you just a hot second and I'll get us going again. Okay. So we're back in business. Give everybody some time to absorb what they just learned, right? Okay, so up next we have another incredibly talented and accomplished individual who's doing great work in the space. So Denise Lieberman is joining us as a nationally recognized voting rights lawyer on the front lines of voting debates in Missouri and nationwide for 25 years. She's director and general counsel of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, Missouri's nonpartisan state voting rights table since 2006. It's funny that I'm doing this introduction because she kind of needs no introduction. I was actually told almost everybody in the league is subscribed to her weekly email newsletter. So Denise has been involved in 5 litigations challenging photo ID restrictions in Missouri, and she's a leading expert on voter IDs nationwide. She also testified on the Voting Rights Act before Congress and previously served as director of Power and Democracy for Advancement Project National Office in Washington, D.C. She's the faculty director of the Voter Access and Engagement Initiative at Washington University in St. Louis, where she's also an adjunct professor of law and political science. And in her role with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, Denise coordinates statewide nonpartisan election protection efforts in Missouri, which revealed significant voter confusion surrounding Missouri's new voter ID requirements during last week's midterm elections. Everyone, please welcome Denise Lieberman.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here with you as your attorney. As you know, the League of Women Voters is currently in court challenging Missouri's photo ID law, and I'm your lawyer on that case. I'm particularly happy to be here with Selena. Back in 2012, I was an advisor to Kathleen Unger, who founded VoteRiders. As someone who was kind of leading in the national space, identifying voter ID issues around the country. And so I'm going to share some of that history and context with you here today as we talk about the impact here in Missouri. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. But I've been working on these issues for quite a long time. Missouri is actually a poster child for voter ID issues around the country. It was one of the first states, along with Indiana and Georgia, to pass a strict photo ID law in 2006. This comes on the heels of the passage of the Help America Vote Act in 2002 in Congress. And so Missouri was really on the very front lines on photo ID. Of course, as you all know, we went to court back in 2006, got that law struck down, and it continued to proliferate every single year thereafter to the point we have today. And of course, we're back in court right now, challenging Missouri's photo ID law on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the NAACP. But it really came to a head nationwide after the election of Barack Obama in 2008. The election of our nation's first African-American president catapulted a stream of legislation following the 2010 midterm elections, which turned many states bright red. And at that point, there was an effort, unlike any that we had seen in the past, coordinated by organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, that was founded and supported by the Koch brothers, to implement voter suppression legislation around the country. And the thing that they started with and the piece of legislation that they promoted across the country was voter ID. And of course, at the time I was in Washington, D.C. In the senior attorney in the Voter Protection Program for Advancement Project National Office, and was charged with tracking that legislation. And within the first 2 months of 2011, I saw that 34 states had introduced identical photo ID bills, including Missouri, by the way. And that led to the production of a report and a national coalition that first started to come together then that identified photo ID as a national trend that was being used to target voters of color and young voters who came out in record numbers during the 2008 elections. So that's a little bit of the background and context that I'm going to share with you today as we talk a little bit about what's going on here in Missouri. And again, as I mentioned, I am really proud to be here as your attorney today, challenging this law in court in Missouri. So the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, I know many of you are familiar with it. We anchor the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is the state table, nonpartisan table in Missouri. It's been around since 2006. It began as the state table to challenge photo ID requirements in Missouri in 2006 and continues on to this day because we're still doing it. And we anchor nonpartisan voting advocacy in Missouri. We are comprise approximately 60 affiliated organizations. Of course, the League of Women Voters is one of the leaders of this coalition. And we anchor policy advocacy on voting rights in Missouri. And so we have that legislative tracker. It's done. We do it every year on voting access issues. And as we head into the next month where pre-filing starts, we're going to start to see some of those bills come up. We anchor strategic litigation on voting rights and voter access in Missouri. And of course, we have 3 lawsuits going on right now, 2 on behalf of the League of Women Voters in Missouri, challenging aspects of Missouri's new voting law. We anchor voter education and engagement. And so we produce those palm cards and toolkits and trainings to make sure that everybody has access to accurate information, because we know, particularly in these days of disinformation about voting, that access to accurate and clear information is really key. That voter confusion and misinformation are powerful vote suppressors. And of course, our signature service program is election protection. We do, in collaboration with our national partners, coordinate the nonpartisan election protection program in Missouri. And I invite all of you, I know many of you are on the Monday calls. We do meet every single week via Zoom on Mondays to get the latest on what's happening in voting in Missouri. So I encourage you to join us, and you can get more info on our website at www.movpc.org. I just want to give a shout out to all of the organizations and groups that contributed to our election protection program this year. And I want to share a little bit of what we saw in Missouri with our new voting law. And many of you know that this new voting law, House Bill 1878, has dozens and dozens of provisions. In fact, it is really breathtaking in the ways that it impacts and changes not only how voters experience elections, but it also changes the balance of powers in how elections are run in Missouri, opening the door to greater legislative takeover of elections, opening the door to private audits, prohibiting local election authorities from obtaining grants to expand their services, expanding the Secretary of State's power to purge voters from the rolls, eliminates our presidential primary system, returning us back to a caucus system, and more. Now, as you all know, it does include 2 weeks of no excuse in-person absentee voting, but that comes with a number of caveats, including that if the photo ID law is struck down, it goes away too, and that is very likely to happen. So most importantly, and I think the provision that impacted voters the most going into the elections was, of course, the enactment of the latest version of Missouri's photo ID law. Again, they've been attempting every year to implement this. We've been in court now 5 times, just in Missouri alone. I've litigated dozens of photo ID cases around the country, including in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Texas. but never as many as here in Missouri because they keep trying to pass this law and we keep getting it struck down in court. Many of you were present at our Voting Rights Lobby Day in Missouri's capital this year in May, and it occurred on the day that House Bill 1878 hit the floor of the Senate. We were grateful to be able to thank some of the legislators who stood up and defended Missourians' right to vote. Here are photos of some of you you'll recognize there. We had a good turnout from Kansas City and the League of Women Voters at that event. And so now we are in court on behalf of you, challenging 3 pieces of House Bill 1878. The first lawsuit challenges voter registration restrictions, including the prohibition on being paid to do voter registration, requiring anyone who does voter registration to pre-register with the Secretary of State's office, and requiring them to be over 18 and registered voters in Missouri, and the absentee voting restriction made it a felony for anyone to solicit an absentee ballot application. That lawsuit was brought, of course, on behalf of you, on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the NAACP. And 5 days before Election Day, we did get a court order blocking those provisions. The second lawsuit we filed is challenging the voter ID restrictions. And that, of course, is also filed on behalf of the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, and individual voters. That one, we got a preliminary procedural ruling striking down the case. We've refiled the papers. The case is moving forward and will get decided in the Missouri Supreme Court. And we expect it to be struck down just as the photo ID law was struck down in the past. But this election was really challenging for many folks here in Missouri. And these are just a few photos from last week. You may recognize some of your friends in here. We had a great turnout by all of our election protection volunteers across the state of Missouri. You can see our Kansas City coordinators, Pat and Anita, up in the top. But I also want to give a big shout out to Donna Hoke with the League in Kansas City, who helped coordinate a lot of the League members' participation across the Kansas City and Western Missouri area. And I also got to give a big shout out to our National Command Center located in Kansas City. We had 95 attorneys staffing the 866 Our Vote hotline, and our escalation attorneys from the local bar associations who were able to do the follow-up that was necessary to resolve tickets. And in all, we've had over 650 field volunteers and 95 lawyers last week here in Missouri, manning our election protection program, making us the 8th busiest national call center for the election protection program. And we ended up with about 650 calls into the hotline since the passage of House Bill 1878, and 900 polling place reports on top of that. And you can see that a significant number did come from your region in Jackson County, and that voter ID issues were one of the top issues reported into the hotline. And we saw this, of course, on the ground, as did many of you who were at the polls trying to assist voters who had questions. What we learned and what we expected, of course, because this law was implemented midway through an election cycle, meaning that the way that people voted in the primary was very different than the rules for voting in the general election. So what we saw on Election Day was mass confusion on the part of voters and poll workers alike, who didn't understand the complexities of Missouri's voter ID law. And so Selena also posted this language, and many of you had this information as well, that under the new law, which is set forth in Chapter 115, 427 of our statutes, Missourians are now required in order to vote in person. And so one change was that this also applies to in-person absentee voting, as well as in-person voting on Election Day. A non-expired Missouri driver, a non-driver license, non-expired military ID, which can include a veteran's ID card, a non-expired US passport, or, and this is the catch-all that people didn't understand, another ID issued by the state of Missouri or federal government that's not expired since before the last general election, which was until last week, November of 2020. In other words, voters could show an expired ID as long as it didn't expire since 2020. It does include a provision for voters that have no ID to cast a provisional ballot, but that ballot is not guaranteed to be counted and is only counted upon a signature match, which courts in our state have previously found to be highly unreliable. The big thing about this law and how it changes prior law is it eliminated the affidavit option. The photo ID law that was passed here in Missouri in 2016 that went into effect in 2017 allowed voters, required a photo ID, but then allowed voters to present a non-photo ID if they didn't have one, as long as they signed an affidavit. And in 2020, the Missouri Supreme Court struck down that affidavit as being unconstitutional and confusing, returning Missourians back to being able to show either a photo or non-photo ID. That whole second section of IDs was eliminated. So here's what voting looked like in August of 2022 and the change that happened to November. And the key pieces that were eliminated were forms of ID that many Missourians relied upon, including the voter registration card you'd get from your local election authority verifying your eligibility to vote in that election, including a student ID from a Missouri college or university or other government document, leaving basically just the kind of ID that you have to get at the DMV. And that really is the crux of the problem with Missouri's voter ID law. But the things that we saw on election day were questions like these. And many voters and poll workers were confused about this. We got reports in the election protection hotline, for example, that poll workers were turning away people if the address on their driver's license didn't match their address of registration. It does not have to. That they were turning away people who had recently expired IDs. No, under Missouri's law, if as long as it expired after November of 2020, they could have used it in last week's election. Now that's going to change going forward because it refers back to the most recent general election, which now is November 8th of 2022. We saw many students impacted in the depositions I took of numerous local election authorities leading up to this November's elections. Many local election authorities expressed concerns about out-of-state students who would be disparately impacted because they were no longer able to use their student IDs. And we did see some problems at polling places on campuses across the state on election day, as well as people that recently moved into Missouri from a neighboring state like Kansas or Illinois. Of course, our two biggest cities are right on state borders, and voters can no longer use that valid Kansas or valid Illinois driver's license. The other thing that we really wanted to make sure people understood as well, what if my picture doesn't match my appearance? One of the challenges with voter ID laws, of course, is that there's a photo on it, and the idea is that the poll worker is supposed to look at the photo and determine if you are who you claim to be. But the truth is that those photos are very unreliable, and election officials and poll workers were actually trained not to look at the photo on the ID. Not only can people's appearances change over time based on weight gain or loss, hair changes, glasses or not glasses, facial hair, but this has been a particularly fraught issue for our gender nonconforming and transgender friends. We did a lot of work with promo this year, the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition did, and provided guidance to all of the state's local election authorities on how to process voters who were gender nonconforming or transgender. We also got a lot of reports on election day about people being denied the ability to cast a provisional ballot, and lots of confusion about provisional ballots overall. And that's because it is confusing. There are two types of provisional ballots, and One is mandated by federal law. That's when your eligibility to vote cannot be immediately established at the polls. In other words, you're not on the rolls. You get a yellow provisional ballot. For voter ID, though, these are people whose names are on the rolls, but don't have a valid form of ID, on this list. Those voters can cast a provisional ballot, but it will only get counted if either you return to the polls with a valid ID on election day, not very likely to happen, or your signature matches your signature on the provisional ballot envelope that you cast at the polls matches the signature that the local election authority has on file for you with your voter registration. And you may not realize this, but in your voter registration record in the Missouri voter registration database, it contains your entire history of voting in Missouri. And it contains a digital image of your original voter registration application, including for people that registered to vote online and may have signed that registration application with a finger or a stylus. That's one reason that provisional ballots might not be counted if a local election authority determines that that signature doesn't match. As I mentioned, we're in court challenging this law, and I took the deposition of about 6 local election authorities in the weeks leading up to the November elections. And what we learned, of course, unsurprisingly, is that poll workers and election staff do not receive any training on how to conduct that signature match. I even had one local election authority, and it's in your jurisdiction. One of the Jackson County election directors actually testified that if I asked her if someone had registered to vote online and used their finger or stylus to sign their voter registration application, in other words, an electronic signature, and if they just use their finger, how would that compare to the signature on the provisional ballot envelope that was signed by the voter using a pen? And she admitted that it would pretty much never constitute a match. And so you think about now then these students who are disparately impacted, who are also disproportionately more likely to register to vote online using electronic tools. That's one reason we've retained a handwriting analysis expert in our photo ID case that is currently pending here in Missouri, who will share the best practices for handwriting analysis. The local election authorities also told us that in average, they not only do they not have any training for comparing those signatures, but they typically spend only about a second looking at the signature to determine if it matches, which falls far, far below the scrutiny that actual handwriting analysts would require. And we really wanted to make sure that people understood these rules and understood that at minimum, though, they could cast a provisional ballot, because this was an area that was greatly confusing for many voters. Even our own volunteers thought that many people could not vote if they did not have a photo ID. And so we wanted to make sure this information was available. And of course, all of you have our palm cards. We made those available to all of you. And we published them as well, as you know, in Spanish, in Korean, in Telugu, in Hindi, in Bosnian, in Arabic, in Chinese, and in Swahili. And I really got to give a big shout out to our language access committee that made that happen. And we also had that information published in large print for voters with disabilities, thanks to the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's Accessibility Committee. Nevertheless, we saw lots of confusion. I want to talk briefly about what some of the barriers are to getting an ID and why we're challenging this law in court. Because even though Missouri's law does require the state to provide assistance and provide one form of ID to voters without cost, number one, it's not a driver's license. You don't get your choice. It's a non-driver ID. And they are supposed to help you get the underlying documents necessary, but they're not advertising it very well, and they don't have the ability to provide assistance where there are problems with those underlying documents. In the state of Missouri, to get a photo ID, and this is not even to get the real ID, it's just to get a state ID that will not be acceptable to enter a federal building or an airport starting next year. Just to get a state ID, you need to provide proof of identity and lawful status, which is typically a certified birth certificate. You also have to provide proof of your social security number, like an original social security card or a tax document, and proof of your Missouri residency. State IDs can cost money. So if you need to get an actual driver's license, the state will not pay for that for you. That can cost up to $30. If you do not have a certified birth certificate, again, the state is required under this law to help you get one. But you can imagine that if you were not born in the state of Missouri and you have to then make that request to another state, that can be very difficult and time consuming. If you were not born in the United States and need to get copies of your naturalization papers, that can cost upwards of $200. And get this, 17 states require you to show a photo ID in order to get a copy of your certified birth certificate if you don't have it, which you need to get a photo ID in the state of Missouri. So one of the witnesses in our lawsuit, for example, is a man who has been unhoused, or he's currently in transitional housing. He was born in New York and adopted. He has been trying to get a copy of his New York birth certificate for a year now in order to get a state ID in Missouri. Because he doesn't have a photo ID in Missouri, he can't. New York is one of the states that requires a photo ID to get a copy of your birth certificate, unless you have multiple other underlying forms of ID that prove your residency, which he does not have because he's in transitional housing. So the Voter Access Coalition, we have a statewide coalition, as you know, that works on getting people voter IDs, has been working with this man for a year now, finally got several organizations and social service agencies to sign affidavits indicating he gets services there in order to get that ID. And that still, he's expecting it to be 8 weeks before he even gets the birth certificate, before he can even start to get his state ID. And that's one of the reasons that these laws are so expensive. And one of the reasons that the fiscal notes for these laws are significant, because states have to provide a form of ID without cost, or else it constitutes a poll tax, which is, of course, unconstitutional. And so we know these barriers are here. We are working very, very closely with the Missouri ID Access Coalition, of which we're a founding member. And of course, working with the ID clinics that we've set up across the state in partnership with Missouri's ID Access Coalition, that are sitting down and providing the underlying documents and helping people get them. I do want to provide a little bit of the legislative history here in Missouri, because we know that these laws are part of a national trend targeting voters who came out in force in 2020, including voters of color and young voters. And we saw this racist vitriol in play during the legislative hearings this year on House Bill 1878. You could see Kevin Windham, the ranking minority member of the House Elections Committee. I was present there that day, along with the NAACP and the League of Women Voters. We all testified. And here's a space where the sponsor of the legislation decided to blaxplain to Representative Windham what it is that Black voters in Missouri wanted. Similarly, you could see here during the floor debate on the measure, that's State Representative Joe Adams, who's also a member of the House Elections Committee, getting talked over and belittled as he spoke out against photo ID on the floor. And luckily, we did have a number of lawmakers who spoke up vigorously against the voter ID legislation that came down this year. Finally, I want to, well, not finally, I want to share a couple of data points here and why I believe we're going to win this lawsuit. There's a lot of people this law affects. And you know, the Secretary of State's office tends to dismiss these numbers, but this is the Secretary of State's own data. I told you, we've been to court so many times, we have the data, right? The Secretary of State's office, the last time they implemented the photo ID law in 2017, conducted a no match analysis. In other words, what they did was they took the list of registered voters in Missouri, and they took the list of people who had a Missouri state ID on file with the Missouri Department of Revenue, which is the agency that oversees motor vehicles. And they compared them because they have the names, they have the addresses, they have date of birth on all that. So they can do a comparison. That comparison revealed over 137,000 registered voters in Missouri did not have any ID on file with the Missouri Department of Revenue. Another 140,000 had IDs that were expired, and another 2,000 had forfeited their IDs. Those might be circumstances like getting a DWI, or maybe somebody that became incapacitated or incarcerated. And I want to speak to incarceration for a minute. One of our newest committees that we're working on is ID access for people who are incarcerated in jails and in prisons, and people coming out of incarceration. And we're actually working on legislation with several lawmakers that would mandate the state to provide IDs to people coming out of incarceration. These communities coming out of incarceration, people in transitional housing, people in shelters, people who've been unhoused, they typically don't have their IDs anymore and don't have a way to get those underlying documents. These are some of the reasons that the Missouri Supreme Court has multiple times concluded that limiting the forms of ID, taking away those choices that Missouris have, is unconstitutional. Back the first time around in 2006 in Weinshank, the Missouri Supreme Court struck down Missouri's photo ID law as a heavy burden on the right of suffrage. This photo here is Kathleen Weinshank. I know many of you knew her. She passed away not that long ago. She had cerebral palsy, so didn't drive, wasn't able to replicate her signature, and that's why that provisional ballot couldn't count for her. She knew that her signature wouldn't match, but she was very active in politics, and many of you, I know, saw her at community meetings. And the court recognized, even back then, that it wasn't just the cost of getting the ID that's the burden here. It's that process of having to get the certified birth certificate. If the name on your certified birth certificate doesn't match the name of your voter registration, you're going to have to go through all kinds of bureaucracies, including sometimes going to court to get a court-ordered legal name change, which comes with a $150 filing fee and legal fees, and can take 6 months to achieve in order to get those underlying documents to match. That's where these burdens come from, and the court recognized that. And the court also rejected this notion that photo ID is necessary to prevent voter fraud. And yet we're hearing these same tropes again and again and again from the state. They're making the same arguments in court right now that have been rejected over and over. Here back in 2006, the court says the state acknowledges that the photo ID requirement is intended to prevent impersonation and will not impact any other kind of fraud. The evidence shows that the legislature has already eliminated the opportunity to commit voter impersonation fraud. We have in this current lawsuit the nation's leading expert on voter fraud, Professor Lori Maniti, who I've been working with since we filed suit in Wisconsin against their photo ID law in 2011, who has also looked deeply at the data in Missouri. There's never been a single prosecuted case of someone pretending to be somebody else at the polls. This is affirmed by national experts. Professor Spencer Overton, who's a professor at Georgetown, was actually on the Carter-Baker Commission after the 2000 elections that led to the passage of the Help America Vote Act, and opposed a voter ID requirement for voters after concluding that photo ID laws wouldn't prevent even one fraudulent vote for every 1,000 legitimate voters who will be excluded. And courts have also found that these laws, when they're on the books, do contribute to lower participation, that they undermine the public's confidence in the electoral process. And it's only gotten worse. So I started this by telling you that this has been going on for over a decade after those 2010 midterm elections. And what we saw were voter ID laws passed in states around the country, gearing up into 2012. But in many places, including Wisconsin, where I filed suit, Pennsylvania, where I filed suit, Texas, where we were also involved in the lawsuit, they were struck down either by the courts or by provisions of the Voting Rights Act. After 2013, in Shelby v. Holder, where the court really gutted the key provisions of the Voting Rights Act, we saw almost immediately that the very states that had voter ID laws blocked because they were found to be racially retrogressive, went about implementing those voter ID laws. In Texas, Attorney General Abbott, before he became governor, immediately before the ink was even dry on the Shelby decision, announced the implementation of Texas's photo ID law that had just been struck down under the Voting Rights Act the year before. So this is what led into that monster voter suppression case in North Carolina. I was very, very honored to be one of the lead lead counsel in that case, representing Reverend Barber and the North Carolina NAACP. And as you know, the court found there that the provisions targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. And it only got worse after the 2020 elections, where we saw a rampage of voter suppression legislation in states around the country. You see Representative Terry Sewell in Congress in Alabama. Old battles have become new again. Alabama, after it passed its photo ID law, which had been held by the Voting Rights Act, but then was allowed to go into effect, you know what they did? They shut down DMV offices in 30 counties, disproportionately African-American counties, which is the only place you can get a voter ID. This all came as Missouri then continued to
Running low
move
on
ahead.
time. So sorry to interrupt.
Nope.
We're just running out of time and we're all riled up with everything you're saying. So
All right, well,
terrible,
I will finish. I can wrap up in about 2 minutes here. But I do want to share with you that this, where we're at now, comes out of this constitutional amendment that Missouri passed in 2016. We challenged the law after that in 2017. We were in trial on the photo ID law in 2019 on behalf of the League of Women Voters. You recognize some of these nice ladies here. And we're back in court again, making the exact same arguments that the Supreme Court has found to be valid in the past. And so I want to sort of end with that, but I do want to share, if I could, that we have been working statewide on the photo ID clinics, and we do have some in Kansas City as well. And I wanted to end, if I might, with a very, very short video, if you'll allow me. It's only a couple minutes long, but this is from Missouri. Oopsie. And it features my own cases. Oh my goodness, why is this not working?
Well, if for
There we go.
any reason it can't work,
Here.
oh, good, great.
That's my mom.
To this video we could share out with class.
Name is Joy Lieberman. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I voted in every election since 1952. I believe that's 60 years. My involvement with education was almost accidental. I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator. I was a very active parent, and when the school district was going through a very traumatic time, I figured, hey, I'll submit myself to this. They won't choose me. And they did. And I spent 24 years on the Board of Education.
My name is Emmanuel Aziz. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I've been a registered voter since the early 80s. Okay, the poster on the wall is of me playing with my band, the Son of Star Child. And, we had an opportunity to play a lot of places and open up for a lot of people. I first started off playing drums when I was a kid, and eventually I made it to the front mic, and I am a front man, as you can see. Jeez.
Well, there's a problem on my birth certificate. The name everyone knows me by, Joy Lieberman. Joy is not my first name, and it's not on my birth certificate. And I discovered that when I was in my mid-40s, thought nothing of it. It was a non-issue until this whole matter of photo IDs reared its head. And I realized that the next time I have to renew my driver's license and present this birth certificate, I'm going to be in big trouble, probably not able to do it.
Everybody's got something they got to go through in life, something that they have to deal with. My test happens to be multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2006, I believe. Some people can't get a state ID because they're in a nursing home like myself. And sometimes you're not able to just get up and get in your car and just go get your ID. You pretty much need to get help. Everybody who's disabled should be a registered voter and being able to vote.
My parents were the first generation in each of their family to be born here. And I'll tell you, they impressed upon me how important it was to vote. And when I thought my right to vote was going to be infringed upon, I was furious. This country fought a war so we wouldn't be taxed without representation. Now, if I lose the right to vote, will the state of Missouri deny my taxes? I don't think so.
Voting means a lot to me because of the fact that my voice is being heard. And I believe that everybody should be able to have their voice heard.
I am an American citizen. It's my right and my duty to participate.
Just because I'm in a wheelchair doesn't mean I can't stand up for my right to vote.
This is your country. You deserve a say-so into who's governing it and how it's being governed.
No matter what.
Against any odds.
November 6th, I'm voting.
November 6th, I am voting.
Minutes afterward to answer questions once we finish our content. Denise, are you able to hang with us after we close for questions, or do you have to
Sure
run off
thing.
to your neck?
Sure
Oh,
thing.
awesome. Okay. Well,
Sorry.
we'll finish our content here and then we'll folks throw questions at you if that's okay. So let's wrap the league portion of the meeting. Judy, if you could do the fast version of the giving thanks final call to action, that would be amazing.
Great, thank you. I sure will. So just take in this slide, if you will, please. We have a thank you to our volunteers and to everyone in the league who participates and gets out the vote and does, everything to attend meetings or whatever part you play. And we have that live right now on almost all of our social media channels. So if you would go and take a minute to go and like that, share it, put your thoughts to it, or to create a post, just really quickly, little thank you, which is a resounding message to anyone that you want to thank who has helped contribute to the electoral process and protected democracy. If you're not connected with us on social media, please look at the links on the left, and you can follow any of those accounts. And one special request, we would love to have you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you just go to youtube.com and put in the @ and LWVKC, you will see our channel, hit the subscribe button, and you'll see everything that we post there, and join us there. So thank you so much for doing this, and have a great day.
Thanks, Judy. And
I
this
want-
meeting will be recorded and posted on that YouTube channel. So if you know anyone missed it, send them there to get this content as well.
Great addition, Heather. Thank you.
Awesome. And then Janelle, can you bring us home with the final calls to action this month? And then we'll kick it back over to Denise for Q&A.
We are all about taking 5 in the league, 5 for action, 5 minutes to make social media posts. This is our 5 ways to engage this month. Number 1, send Sandy Eads your poll work feedback by Wednesday. RSVP to the December 7th winter event for members. Number 3, sign up for the Legislative Action Bill Tracker training on December 10th with Mary Lindsay. Number 4, contact Rita if you're interested in a board position or serving on the nominating committee. And number 5, thank someone for their part in supporting the election process this year. Thank you.
And can I also add that on Thursday, December 1st, we will be having our last 2022 new member orientation. New members and current members are all welcome to come on from 5 to 6.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, that concludes the content of our meeting. Laura, if you don't have anywhere to rush off to, I would love to let you run the Q&A if you don't mind. I have to catch a flight out of beautiful Barbados. Huge thank you to Denise and democracy is important, folks, no matter where you are in the world. So thank you to Selena and Denise for your time on this beautiful Saturday morning. We really, really appreciate you. Laura, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
No problem.
I wish we were all going with you.
Come on
Well,
in.
she's coming home.
Yeah, sadly, I'm coming home to the cold, I hear. So.
Oh, you're coming home.
Yeah, so it's been beautiful, but I guess I'd better come back. Thanks
it.
all.
So I'm looking at the chat, and I think Kelly says what we were all feeling. My blood pressure is going up as Denise was telling us all the things that we are up against, and yet I think our blood pressure can go down a little bit with the fact that Denise also outlined all the ways that she and the League and the Voter Protection Coalition are fighting against the issues of voter suppression. So
let me say something real quick, because I think
Sure.
it's important here. I want to really thank the League for standing up to be the plaintiffs in the lawsuit challenging Missouri's photo ID law, because without organizations and individuals who step up and agree to challenge the law, we don't have the ability to have these court victories. And I am anticipating that we're going to be successful in this court case. And it's a lot of work, especially for your executive director, Jean Dugan, who has to answer all kinds of questions and produce documents and everything like that. And all of you who have been out doing that election protection work to document these issues. So thank you for helping lead the way in making Missouri safer for everybody else to be able to cast their ballot, because we couldn't do this without the League.
On a national note, I was so proud of the League for filing the lawsuit against the voter intimidation in Arizona with the militiamen dressed up in gear with their guns near the drop boxes. And the League did prevail on that. So, not only are we local, where absolutely all politics start, but do. Yeah, why does may have left us with recording still going on, and that may be why we're left us with the recording still going on, and that may be why
I'm checking out.
Thank you. Somebody who can, I don't know if Janelle can check that out and maybe stop the recording. Stacy Webb has raised her hand, so Stacy, go